People who have gone to summer camp as a child, what was your creepy, scary experience? As a 13-year-old kid, I went out into the woods at like 1 a.m. with a headlamp to pee, just immediately behind my cabin, because I didn't want to walk to the wash house. While I'm peeing, I look forward and see a large bear, just staring at me. Would have pissed myself if not for the fact that I was already peeing. Either way, I just finished my stream while he stared at me and walked backwards back to the cabin. He turned around and walked away, but there was no chance in hell that I would turn my back on a bear and run the other way. At a cadet camp, we had gone out on the lake pulling some whalers, rowing heavy gray boats, that fit about 12 people. We were having fun racing each other, when our leaders directed us to form a square with the boats at a spot in the water about 100 yards from the shoreline. Then they told us to look in the water in the center of the square. There was the tip of a ship's mast visible just a few feet under the green water. Apparently, a couple hundred years ago, a big ship had crashed and sunk there in shallow water. I don't think anyone died in the sinking, but talk about thalassophobia, fear of the ocean. There was this huge-ass ship right underneath us and you could barely see it if you didn't know it was there. During scout camp, I had a tree branch fall on my head. I was under the tree when I heard a cracking noises above me. I could tell it wasn't safe, so I attempted to move somewhere safer, and I guess the universe had it out for me because I only made it about 4 feet before the branch landed squarely on my head. Luckily, it wasn't that big and was soft from being rotten, so it didn't cause any major damage. Did hurt like heck though and put me in a lot of shock. I was a Boy Scout, and I must have been 14 because it was during the ritual where you get your totem name. You spend a night alone in the woods. Well, I was not so far away from a farm it seems because I would on occasion hear a horrifying sound coming from there, in a dark wood in the middle of the night. And a loud sound it was. The sounds came straight out of a horror movie. Or out of hell, I don't know. It's hard to describe how terrorizing it sounded. It felt like screams of humans who were being slaughtered, but the screams were distorted and sounded different. Turns out a cow was giving birth. I was about 12 and I was at sleepaway camp and the counselors took us on a hike into the woods for a night. When it came time to go to bed, of course none of us were actually falling asleep and we overheard the counselors talking about the police looking for someone. We later learned one of the kids was in the middle of a serious custody battle and that the dad was planning on taking the kid and that the reason we were in the woods was so that he wouldn't find us at the cabin. No idea if it was actually dangerous, but looking back it definitely is unsettling. I was young, like 12 years old, and at Girl Scout camp. One night, after lights out, we were told by our counselors to stay in the cabins, latch the doors, get under the beds and turn out all lights. Some old guy had gotten drunk and trespassed. He had been walking around the property but luckily, didn't find any of the campgrounds. Rumors were he had an axe, but I don't think that's true. I went to Girl Scouts camp when I was around 8 years old. So around 2001. All the counselors were young 20-year-olds. There was a girl in my group who did something to piss off the counselors, I don't remember what, but I know it was minor. It was the middle of summer and super hot, and she was moderately overweight. They made her sit in the sun and wouldn't allow her to have any water as punishment. They were terrible people, made me super afraid of them as a kid. My camp counselor thought it'd be a good idea to take her group of 11-year-olds out of the warm cabin we were sleeping in and instead sleep overnight on the outdoor stage they used for camp plays. It must have been 10 degrees out. I was so cold, it was unbearable. I couldn't conserve any body heat because I had a stick for a body and my sleeping bag wasn't made for that type of camping. I remember being tense and scrunched up in a ball. Every movement I made was like dipping my legs in ice. The outside of my sleeping bag was wet and cold from condensation, which made it worse. Eventually, we walked back at 4 a.m. because all the kids couldn't take it anymore. It wasn't creepy, but it was scary to be so cold and tired in the dark. I still remember it. My youth group stayed at a campsite for a weekend trip. We were all in the cabin playing card games when someone with a gorilla suit ran by the cabin and started banging on the door. It really freaked everyone out because it was no one in our group. They came back a couple times until one of the adults confronted the person and they ran away. They never found out who the person was. Stayed at a week-long camp in the early 80s. Our cabins were a mix of old lumber, built in the 40s or 50s, and new cinder block from the 70s. A series of storms hit one night, and my old cabin was shaking like a ship at sea. A camp director banged on our door and told us to grab a sleeping bag, a pillow, a jacket and our shoes, and we hiked in the dark to the rec center basement. Tornado sirens were blaring, and we could hear trees crashing in the woods around us. We made it and hunkered down through the storms, but that walk was the longest half-mile of my life. 10 years old, summer camp in the mountains. One of the big events of the week was an overnight hike up the mountain, which I was already dreading because of my asthma, and when we got up there, instead of tents we slept in a tarp that had been set up to cover the ground up and then over us. Meaning our feet were pointing out into the forest. I woke up halfway through the night to snuffling sounds and heavy footsteps. Then something bumped my feet, which were sticking out a little farther than the rest of the group. I froze up and waited for what I'm almost 100% convinced was a bear lose interest and move on, but I never went back to that camp for summer camp again. We were playing soccer, and someone shattered my leg, broke it in 8 places. There was no swelling, so they said I was faking it and they wouldn't take me to the hospital. They sent me back to my cabin for the night. I hopped around for a day, but the next night, I was in too much pain to sleep. So, I limped to the nurse's office, broke in and took a handful of Benadryl just so I could sleep. That night, a group was doing an overnight in a 3-sided shelter and decided to have a peanut butter fight before bed. One kid fell asleep with peanut butter in his hair and woke up when a skunk walked into the shelter and pulled a piece of his scalp out. The kid punted the skunk out of the shelter, which caused it to spray everyone on the overnight. So, they had to take the kid for rabies shots, so they might as well take me along to get x-rays since they were going anyway. Helen Keller could have pointed out the breaks on my x-rays. Went on a camping trip. I was one of the first ones out of the bus and had to use the public bathroom. I notice a few daddy long legs on the wall outside the bathroom and think nothing of it. I open the door and am immediately greeted by thousands if not millions of daddy long legs that are covering the bathroom from top to bottom. The bathroom was big as well, like 3 stalls and 3 urinals. That, and coupled with the fact that our camp counselors were sadistic and told us preteens a bunch of scary stories, then jumped out of the woods in the middle of the night screaming with bloody Jason masks. I stayed in my tent most of the time after that. Went to a Boy Scout summer camp in the mid-late 90s. They had an archery range where we all were learning how to shoot. They were big on safety, but it was the 90s. So, anyways, everyone shoots, and we are downrange getting our arrows, then we hear someone yell out in the covered shooting area. I look up and see the semi-special needs kid holding an arrow at full draw and lets go. Hits the kid standing 5 feet from me in the arm. It's chaos, everyone's running around and screaming. The kid with an arrow stick out of him is just standing there in shock. Next year, there was no more archery training,